Before the story begins, please comment below where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Stories with Meaning can continue growing and bringing you more heartfelt stories. My name is Edward Williams. I am 62 years old, a widower for the past 7 years. I live alone in my parents' old house in Fresno, California. The house is small, but it is full of memories. Cracks run along the walls, each one holding a story only I remember. I used to work as a construction site supervisor. Now I survive on my pension and small jobs, fixing neighbors' roofs or fences. My hands are still strong, though wrinkles now replace the muscles that once defined them. My wife, Margaret, passed away from uterine cancer. She was patient, gentle, and the heart of our family. She loved home-cooked meals. Every Sunday, this house used to be filled with the scent of spices and warm laughter. Now, only silence remains. We had one son, Daniel, now 35 years old. Through Margaret and my sacrifices, he graduated in civil engineering from MIT. We saved every dollar, skipped every luxury, just so he could have a future. He was brilliant, always top of his class. Margaret used to say, "Edward, our son will become someone great." I believed her. But after Daniel married Isabella, a woman from a well-established family in Manhattan, everything changed. Daniel stopped coming home, not just physically, but emotionally. The weekly phone calls disappeared. Now he only calls on Christmas or Thanksgiving. Daniel and Isabella live in an upscale neighborhood in Aspen, Colorado, a modern 2-story house with a backyard and open kitchen. A house bought on a mortgage. The down payment was paid entirely by me. Without hesitation, I emptied my retirement savings so they could start their life. Over the years, I paid kitchen renovation, $3,800, high-end kitchen set and refrigerator, monthly mortgage, $2,600 per month for over 5 years, fence renovation, $900, new TV for the holidays, $750, preschool tuition for my grandchild, $1,450. I never counted, because what kind of father counts what he gives his child? The visit. On December 10th, just before sunset, I visited Daniel's house. I brought simple gifts, rice crackers, pork rinds, and an envelope of cash for the grandchild I had barely seen since infancy. Isabella opened the door, smiled politely, and let me in. I sat on a gray sofa in the living room. Everything looked new, expensive. My aging eyes searched the walls for family photos. There were none of me. "Daniel, your father is here," Isabella called out. Daniel came out, awkward. "You didn't say you were coming," he said softly, kissing my cheek. I tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe this Christmas we can eat here together. I can cook your mom's chicken stew, the one you loved as a kid." Daniel glanced nervously toward the kitchen. Silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke, his words sounding rehearsed. "I'm sorry, Dad. This Christmas, it's better if you don't come. Isabella's parents will be staying over. They have certain standards." My chest tightened. "So, I'm not appropriate at the dining table?" I asked quietly. Isabella stepped in, smiling thinly. "Mr. Williams is kind, but too traditional to be part of our image." She knew. This wasn't about tradition. It was about class. Image, she called it. Appropriate, she said. Her words pierced deeper than she knew. I remembered her social media post. "Family isn't about who gave birth to you, but who knows how to dress properly at the dinner table." Since owning that house, I was never invited to family gatherings. I only saw my son and grandson through Facebook photos. Happy, without me. The truth. As I prepared to leave, I passed the photo shelf. Year by year, my face disappeared from every frame. At the door, my hand trembling on the handle, I said without turning behind, "Please send my regards to your parents. Enjoy Christmas with your new standards." As the door closed, I heard Isabella whisper loud enough for me to hear, "Mr. Williams is kind, but too traditional to be part of our image." Then the laughter, a sharp, cruel sound. The accountant. Back in Fresno, rain fell as I drove. The old car remained loyal, unlike people who change when their lives improve. A classic song played on the radio. Margaret loved it. That night, I opened my old laptop. For the first time, I counted. $2,600 times 61 months equals $158,600. I stared at the number. "This isn't generosity," I whispered. "This is neglect of myself." I printed every receipt. Then I burned them. Not of regret, but liberation. The call. The next day, while repairing a neighbor's roof, my phone rang. Isabella. "Mr. Williams, can you pick up my parents at San Francisco International Airport at 12:15 p.m.? Use your car." I paused. "I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not this family's driver." She tried to soften her voice. "My parents are important people. They can't take random taxis." I smiled bitterly. "I'm fixing a neighbor's roof today." Her voice sharpened. "You know my father cares about image, like that time you came to our child's birthday wearing flip-flops." Yes, the same flip-flops I wore while paying their mortgage. She ended with a laugh. "Mr. Williams is like automatic debit. As long as it runs, we accept it. Once it stops, maybe it's time to replace it." I ended the call, disconnected the phone, sat alone in my living room, and wrote one sentence in my notebook. "I am not a debit machine. I am a father you were ashamed of."
Suitcases piled high on a luggage cart. Important people who refused to take street taxis. People whose daughter had taught my own son to feel ashamed of having a father like me. Back in my small house in Fresno, I began preparing tea and a plan. After all these years of giving everything without conditions, I finally understood something. Sometimes love that gives too much can slowly kill your self-respect. And today, I chose to revive mine. I sat on the front porch, staring at Margaret's photo hanging on the wall. "Margaret," I whispered, "am I wrong for wanting to be respected as a father, not treated like a walking bank account?" The rain started falling again. I went inside and opened my savings passbook. What remained of my retirement fund was barely enough. Almost all of it had gone to Daniel and Isabella, for their beautiful house, their polished lifestyle, their elegant dining table that, it turned out, had no seat for me. My phone rang again. Daniel. This time, I chose not to answer. Let him feel what it's like when your calls go unanswered, when your presence no longer matters. That night, I made a decision. Many things would change from now on. I was no longer an automatic debit account. I was a father who still had dignity worth protecting. "Margaret," I whispered to my wife's photo, "forgive me if this isn't the way you would have wanted, but I have to do this, for Daniel too." My phone buzzed repeatedly. A message from Daniel. "Dad, why aren't you answering? Isabella is very upset. Her parents had to wait almost an hour at the airport. They are extremely unhappy. Please call us immediately." I smiled faintly. Sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 words. And tonight, my silence was my answer to those who had long reduced me to a number in their bank ledger. The smear. After disconnecting both my cell phone and landline, I sat on the porch, sipping tea, reading the daily crime section of the California Herald. There was a strange sense of peace after deciding I would no longer serve as Daniel and Isabella's automatic debit machine. "Mr. Williams," Mr. Ron Harris, my neighbor across the fence, called. "Haven't seen you around much. You doing okay?" I smiled and nodded. I'm fine. Just needed some time to myself. Ron was one of the few neighbors who still looked after me since Margaret passed away. Sometimes he invited me for soup at the corner diner or coffee on his porch. "There's a community prayer meeting at Mr. Samuel Carter's house tomorrow morning. Come by. Don't isolate yourself too much." I nodded again. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to reconnect with neighbors instead of dwelling on Daniel and his family who no longer respected me. But the next morning, my plans changed drastically. As I picked up the newspaper from the porch, I saw my own face on page 3 of the California Herald. My heart stopped. The headline read, "Elderly man abandons in-laws at airport during heavy rain, allegedly due to mental instability." My hands trembled as I read the distorted article. They described me as unstable. They even quoted Richard Coleman, Isabella's father. We were abandoned by a father-in-law who seems no longer able to distinguish reality from personal emotions. Worse, still, Isabella was quoted. "My father has high blood pressure and nearly collapsed while waiting on the sidewalk with no pickup. We are deeply concerned about Mr. Williams' mental condition." I sat frozen, staring at the paper. How could they do this? Twist the truth, paint me as a mentally unstable old man simply because I refused to be their personal chauffeur. But I didn't tear the paper. I didn't slam the table. I simply looked at the cracked kitchen counter and said quietly to myself, "If you choose to play dirty in public, don't forget who built your house from the foundation." The preparation. I opened my old laptop. The folder labeled Daniel and Isabella didn't contain only financial records. There was more. I began downloading their social media photos, vacations, parties, the new house. I saved screenshots of Isabella's posts. "So proud to host Christmas Eve this year. Everything is the result of hard work and parental blessings." Hard work, she said. Almost everything in that house had been paid for with my money, including the chairs her parents would sit on during Christmas dinner. Digging deeper, I investigated the smear article. Through LinkedIn, I discovered that Richard Coleman was a board member of the California Business Ethics Council and had close personal ties to the California Herald's editor-in-chief. The article was written by Rachel Monroe, a journalist usually assigned to food and lifestyle, not social affairs. The logic was obvious. This was a coordinated narrative. They wanted to publicly humiliate me as punishment for saying no. Public judgment. The next day, the impact became visible. At the local grocery store, women whispered as I passed, "That's the man who abandoned his in-laws at the airport. So sad, old and senile. His son is so good, still taking care of him." I didn't defend myself. I simply smiled. Let them talk. At home, I began organizing documents, not for revenge, but to establish the truth. Bank transfers, renovation invoices, mortgage payment receipts. Every page highlighted. Paid in full, without ever being asked. On each page, I wrote a small note. When love becomes debt, ending support turns you into a criminal. I remember Daniel once saying, "Dad, we're not financially stable yet. Help us start our life." Without hesitation, I handed over my retirement savings, money meant for my old age, not to be praised, but never to be erased and trampled like this. "Margaret," I whispered to my late wife's photo, "what went wrong with our son? What went wrong with our upbringing?" The packages. Over the next 2 days, I prepared 14 document packages, one for each guest attending Christmas Eve at Daniel's house. Each package contained financial proof, photos and videos, screenshots of Isabella's shopping sprees while utility bills were overdue, WhatsApp messages, Facebook posts, the newspaper article marked in red, high-level deception. They wanted to smear my name publicly. Fine, but the public would know the truth too. I picked up my old Canon camera, replaced the battery, and said quietly, "You like the stage. Let's open every curtain." This wasn't a revenge. This was dignity. About refusing to be a victim of slander after years of being their financial backbone. About proving that even a simple old man like me deserves respect, not pity or ridicule. Countdown to Christmas. I compiled a master chronology. Year 1, monthly mortgage support. Year 2, kitchen, bathroom, and backyard renovations. Year 3, hospital expenses when Daniel was ill for 2 weeks. Year 4, birthday gifts and an education savings account for my grandson. Year 5, paying off Isabella's credit card debt, tens of thousands of dollars. Everything documented, undeniable. This isn't about money, I told myself. This is about acknowledgement. That I am not an old man who abandoned family at an airport. I am a father who funded a lifestyle his own child is now ashamed to admit came from me. Scrolling through Isabella's Facebook again, I saw her latest post. Can't wait for a night full of love, great food, and an honorable family. Honorable. People who abandon parents for image. People who destroy a father's name in a local paper. We'll see who remains honorable after that night. 3 days remained before Christmas Eve. I closed the suitcase containing all 14 document packages. "Margaret," I whispered, "pray that I stay strong when facing our own son."
That night, I slept restlessly. Dreams came in fragments. Daniel as a little boy running across the yard. Margaret smiling while cooking in our old kitchen. The simple family we once built with love. How did it all end with my name smeared in a local newspaper, accused of abandoning my daughter-in-law's parents at an airport? I woke up before dawn with a resolve stronger than ever. This was not about revenge. This was about setting the truth straight. There are nights when not every candle is blown out with a prayer. Some are lit to burn lies that have been hidden for too long. December 24th arrived faster than I expected. All day long I rechecked every document I had prepared. Nothing missing, no detail overlooked. My stomach churned, a mix of nerves and unwavering determination. "Mr. Williams, where are you going all dressed up?" asked Mrs. Susan Miller, my neighbor, seeing me ironing my best white shirt on the porch. "Meeting family," I answered briefly. "That's good. Don't let yesterday's newspaper get to you. Everyone knows you're a good man," she said with a warm smile. I only nodded. Not everyone needed to know what I planned to do that night. At 6:30 p.m., I was ready. A clean white shirt, black dress pants, and polished leather shoes, not the flip-flops that once embarrassed Isabella. Tonight, I wanted to look my best, not for them, but for myself. A small suitcase containing 14 document folders, my camera, and copies of the newspaper article sat by the door. I looked at Margaret's photo one last time. "Pray for me," I whispered. The arrival. The drive to Daniel's house felt longer than usual. I turned off the radio. Silence was all I wanted. I parked 3 houses away, deliberately keeping my car out of sight. Step by step, I walked toward the luxurious home that I had paid for more than anyone knew. From outside, it glittered. Christmas lights lined the porch. A large pine tree stood tall behind the window. Laughter and music spilled into the night. I knocked on the half-open door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The air was filled with laughter, soft Christmas music, the scent of roasted chicken and expensive wine. The living and dining rooms were crowded. elite neighbors, Richard Coleman's business associates, members of the local business community, and even a lifestyle journalist I recognized as a food columnist from the California Herald, probably Isabella's acquaintance. Isabella stood in the center of the room, laughing freely, wearing an elegant red dress. Daniel spoke quietly with two men in gray suits at the corner, nodding seriously as if discussing important business. I entered calmly, unnoticed at first. I placed my small suitcase on a side table near the dining area. Only then did heads begin to turn. Some faces showed shock, some showed disdain. Isabella immediately stood up, her face drained of color. "Mr. Williams, this is inappropriate. This is a family event," she said, forcing composure for her guests. I answered calmly, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Precisely because this is family, I'm here, so you all know who paid for everything in this room." Daniel rushed over, his face a mixture of panic and anger. "Dad, please don't do this. We can talk later." "There is no later, not after you chose to slander your own father in the newspaper." Whispers filled the room. I opened the suitcase. One by one, I handed documents to the guests. I did not raise a voice. I only asked in the direction of those who considered myself a mentally unstable old man. "This is not an accusation," I said simply. "This is documentation. Please read." Folders opened. Silence followed. "All of this came from him?" asked a middle-aged woman wearing expensive jewelry. "I thought this house was inherited." Isabella panicked. "He offered to help. We never asked." I interrupted gently. "I helped because I hoped I was still considered a father. But if I'm only an automatic debit, then tonight it stops." The room went dead silent. Only soft Christmas music continued to play. The collapse of the lie. Richard Coleman finally stepped forward, his face flushed. "What is the meaning of this, ruining our Christmas night?" "No, Mr. Coleman," I replied calmly. "I'm correcting the story you spread in the newspaper." I held up the article. "You said I abandoned you at the airport due to mental instability. What you forgot to mention is that for 5 years I paid the mortgage for the house you're sitting in." His wife looked stunned. "You're trying to humiliate us in front of our guests?" "You already did that to me, in print," I said. "I'm only balancing the scale." Daniel tried to pull me toward the back room. "Dad, this is humiliating. Let's talk privately." "Like the newspaper article?" I asked bitterly. "Public accusations, no audience allowed to respond?" "No, Daniel. If you chose a public forum to disgrace your father, then a public forum is where the truth belongs." Richard pointed at me, his hand shaking. "You think this won't have consequences?" "Oh, it will, but not for me. For those who built reputations on a parent's money and discarded him once he was no longer useful." Guests murmured. A man I recognized as a local council member whispered to his partner, "I'm canceling any business with them." The lifestyle journalist quietly photographed the documents. I didn't stop her. Let the truth spread as widely as the lie. Isabella broke down in tears, her makeup ruined. "Why would you destroy our family like this?" "Family?" My voice trembled. "When was the last time you treated me like family? When you needed money? A driver? You erased me from family photos. I showed the last photo of all of us together, taken 4 years ago, then newer photos where I no longer appeared. You destroyed it first. I'm only showing the world what it feels like to be discarded once you're no longer useful." Daniel stood frozen. For the first time, I saw genuine shame in his eyes. Not shame of having me as a father, but shame for what he had done.
Dad, he began, I don't need to explain. The evidence speaks for itself. Richard tried salvaging the situation, whispering explanations to guests, but their faces showed doubt. An elderly man stepped forward. "Mr. Williams," he said, extending his hand, "my name is Samuel Reed. I've known Richard for over 20 years. What I saw tonight disappoints me deeply. Thank you for telling the truth." I shook his hand, deeply moved. One by one, guests began leaving. What was meant to be a festive Christmas celebration turned into an awkward, hollow gathering. I felt my role was complete. I walked calmly toward the door. Daniel chased after me. "Dad, please don't leave like this. We need to talk." "We've talked for years," I said softly. I was talking to a wall. Tonight, others finally heard my voice. As I stepped outside, Isabella's sobs echoed behind me. Even louder was Richard shouting, smashing a glass. "I'll make sure he loses everything." I turned back once. "You've already lost something far greater, your dignity." The door closed behind me. Aftermath. My steps felt light walking back to the car. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight I felt relieved, not because I had taken revenge, but because the truth was finally free. In the car, I looked at Margaret's photo in my wallet. "Forgive me," I whispered. "This isn't what you wanted for our family, but sometimes the truth must be spoken, no matter how painful." On the drive home, I thought of the guests' faces, admiration turning to disappointment as they realized the truth behind the luxury. Daniel's pale face, Isabella's tears, Richard's rage. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only relief that the lie no longer lived. At home, I sat on the porch beneath a star-filled sky. "Good night, Margaret," I whispered to the night air. "Tonight I defended our name. I hope you understand." The next morning I woke feeling different. No weight on my chest, no buried anger, only peace. I brewed coffee, sat on the porch, and for the first time since Margaret passed away, I enjoyed the morning without the burden of transferring money, without the obligation to always be available. I felt free. The phone rang. I didn't answer.
I smiled faintly. The truth always finds its own way to surface. After the storm passes, what comes is not peace, but the wreckage left behind, revealing who survived and who lost their way. 2 days after that Christmas Eve, local news exploded. A response article written by an independent journalist who had been present that night appeared with a bold headline. "Who was truly abandoned? The story behind a father's silent support." The article went viral across social media. It featured photos of documents, statements from several guests who had attended the gathering, and excerpts from the financial breakdown I had distributed that night. There was no slander in the article, only facts, facts that had long been hidden behind the luxury of my son's family. My phone rang non-stop since early morning. Journalists, neighbors, even people claiming to be Daniel's friends wanted to talk. I chose not to answer. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what had already happened didn't need further discussion. The truth had been revealed, and that was enough for me. "Mr. Williams, is what's written in this morning's paper true?" asked Mr. Samuel Carter when we met at the small coffee shop near my house. "Which part, Mr. Carter?" I asked, pretending ignorance. "About you being the one who financed your son's luxury home, only to be slandered in the newspaper?" I smiled thinly. Every parent wants the best for their child. Unfortunately, not every child wants the best for their parent. Mr. Carter nodded slowly. I admire your courage. It's not easy to stand up to your own child like that. It wasn't courage, it was necessity. There comes a time when we must stop allowing ourselves to be trampled, even by our own flesh and blood. The fall. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a distance as the reputations of Richard Coleman and Isabella collapsed. Through neighbors who still had connections in business circles, I heard that Richard had been removed from his position as honorary chairman of a regional business association. Sponsors withdrew funding from one of Isabella's charitable foundations. Several contracts Daniel had been negotiating were abruptly canceled. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only sadness that things had to come to this. But, as the saying goes, you reap what you sow. For 3 months, January through March, I heard nothing from Daniel or Isabella. No calls, no messages, no visits. And I didn't seek them out. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned to let people face the consequences of the seeds they planted. I began enjoying a new life, free from the burden of financing someone else's luxury. I used my remaining savings for myself, fixing the leaking roof, repainting the faded walls, and even starting a small vegetable garden in the backyard, a hobby Margaret once loved dearly. "Margaret," I whispered one morning as I watered the tomato plants, "I can grow vegetables again, just like we used to." Days passed peacefully, until one morning in early March I received a letter from Bank of America, Aspen Branch. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Notice of mortgage default. Outstanding balance $7,500. Unpaid for 3 consecutive months. Final deadline 14 days. I sat frozen on the porch, staring at the morning sky. So for 3 months Daniel hadn't paid the mortgage. Was it because his contracts were canceled? Because their business collapsed after Richard's reputation was destroyed? The part of me that was still a father felt worried, but the part of me that had been betrayed repeatedly reminded me this was no longer my responsibility. Several days passed. I chose not to contact Daniel. If he needed help, he knew where to find me. But this time, I would not come with an open wallet. This time, I wanted to come as a father, not as a walking ATM. The visit. On Thursday night, around 7:30 p.m., there was a knock at the door. My heart pounded. I knew sooner or later Daniel would come. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there alone. His face looked exhausted, eyes sunken, his suit still neat but worn, tie loosened. He looked like a man who had lost everything. "Dad?" he called softly, his voice hoarse. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Daniel walked in slowly, carrying a small folder and an envelope I recognized immediately. A bank notice, printed bills, and what looked like a written request for assistance. We sat facing each other in the modest living room that once held our family gatherings. "Dad," Daniel began, his voice breaking. I'm sorry." Tears streamed down his face. For the first time since he became an adult, I saw my son cry like this. Not manipulative tears, but the tears of someone truly shattered. "I was wrong, Dad. I got carried away by a luxurious lifestyle. I followed Isabella's wishes and her parents. I lost my direction." He lowered his head, crying silently. My words were harsh, but they were the truth he needed to face. "Where's Isabella now?" I asked. "She went back to Los Angeles, took the kids, and is staying with her parents. She said she couldn't handle the shame I caused." I smiled bitterly. "The shame you caused? Or the shame you were supposed to carry together?" Daniel nodded weakly. "She's always been like that, Dad, always blaming others. I'm only realizing it now." Silence filled the room. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained, reminding me of the night in their luxurious living room months earlier. "So," I finally said, "what do you want from me now?" Daniel handed me another envelope. "I've prepared a staged repayment proposal. If you could help with the initial payment, I'll cover the rest from my new job." "A new job?" I asked. "I'm working as a regular staff member at a small contractor company. The pay isn't much, but enough for a simple life." I stared at the envelope without opening it. "Daniel," I said slowly, "did you come here for money or to repair our relationship?" He was silent for a moment. "Both," he answered honestly. "Yes, I need financial help. I won't lie about that. But more than that, I miss you, Dad. I miss the family we used to have." "And you think money can bring that back?" "No, but maybe it can be a beginning." I exhaled deeply. "If you want to rebuild this relationship, start with attitude, not with bills. Respect your parents not when you need them, but when you don't." Daniel nodded, tears flowing again. "I understand. I'll try." We sat in silence for a long time. I made no promise of financial help, and Daniel seemed to finally understand that. "May I come again, Dad?" he asked before leaving. "Maybe this weekend we can eat together like we used to." "Of course," I replied. "This door is always open for you, Daniel. But next time, come as a son, not as a beggar." Daniel nodded, kissed my hand, and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "Isabella said this was all just about pride that was too high." I smiled faintly. "And now," I said calmly, "your pride isn't even enough to save the house you built with my pride." Reflection. After Daniel left, I sat on the porch for a long time. My thoughts drifted back to the days when our family was still whole, when Margaret was still alive, Daniel was still a child, and life felt simple. "Margaret," I whispered to her photo, "our son is learning a painful lesson." Was I too harsh? But deep down, I knew Margaret's answer. She had always taught Daniel about honesty and responsibility. She would agree that sometimes the most important lessons in life come through pain. That night, I slept with mixed emotions. Sadness, seeing my son fall so far, but also a faint hope that from the ruins of his old life, Daniel could build something better. Something based on integrity and respect, not false appearances and hollow pride. The next morning, I called Rose, Margaret's cousin. Her family had always maintained a good relationship with me, even though they lived far away in Santa Barbara, California. "Rose, Daniel came last night," I told her. "How is he, Uncle Edward?" she asked, having already heard about the family drama from the news. "Destroyed," I replied. "His house is about to be foreclosed. His wife left. His career is in shambles." There was a pause. "So, will you help him again?" she asked gently. "I don't know, Rose. Part of me wants to help. He's still my son. But another part of me feels this is..."
Maybe she was right. Maybe the greatest form of love I could give Daniel right now was to let him learn from his own mistakes. "Margaret," I whispered as I stared at the evening sky, "grant me the wisdom to be the father Daniel needs, not the father he wants." After being betrayed repeatedly by those you've given everything to, sometimes the most liberating thing is not revenge, but stopping yourself from waiting for an apology. A week passed after Daniel's visit. I didn't contact him, and he didn't contact me either. Perhaps he already suspected that I wouldn't help him financially this time, or perhaps he was too ashamed to return without bringing a solution. Without the obligation of monthly transfers to Daniel's account, I began enjoying what remained of my savings to restore this old house. A house filled with memories of Margaret, the place where we raised Daniel with love.
The leaking roof, which I had long covered with tarps, was finally repaired with the help of Mr. Ron Harris. The peeling walls were repainted in Margaret's favorite light blue. I even bought a second-hand dining table, simple, sturdy, and clean, to replace the old one that had been eaten away by termites. "Wow, Mr. Williams, your house looks so fresh now," said Mrs. Sullivan, a neighbor, as she dropped by with a homemade cake. "It's time to renew life," I replied with a smile. With what little money I had left, I began participating in simple community activities, joining neighborhood gatherings, helping a neighbor whose child was ill with a small donation, buying school shoes for Rose's nephew who had just started elementary school. "You really didn't have to do this, Uncle Edward," Rose said when I delivered the shoes to her home in Santa Barbara, California. "It's no trouble at all," I replied sincerely. "This makes me feel alive again." Rose's family had always made me feel welcome. They never judged me by what I owned, but by who I was. The children called me Grandpa Ed with affection and often invited me over on Friday nights for family gatherings. In these small moments, I felt valued not for the money I gave, but for my presence. It felt like rediscovering the meaning of family that I had nearly forgotten. "Margaret," I whispered to her photo one evening, "if you were still here, you'd be happy to see how warm Rose's family is to us." A turning point. 2 weeks after that night, Daniel sent me a short message. "Dad, the house is being foreclosed. Isabella decided to go back to Los Angeles with the kids." I read the message several times, trying to sense the emotions behind those brief words. Regret? Anger? Or was this simply another subtle way to ask for help? After some reflection, I replied, "You may come, but not to ask for money, just to talk, as a son to a father." Unexpectedly, Daniel replied almost immediately, "Thank you, Dad. I'll come Saturday afternoon." That Saturday, at the end of March, the sky over Fresno, California, was clear and cloudless. I deliberately cooked chicken soup, Daniel's favorite since childhood, not to spoil him, but to remind him of simpler times, when our family was happy without luxury. Right on time, Daniel arrived. This time, he wasn't wearing a tailored suit or an expensive shirt, just a simple polo and faded jeans. He didn't bring folders, no bills, only a bag filled with old family photos. "Dad," he greeted me, kissing my hand. "Come in. I made your favorite soup." We sat together in the living room, eating quietly. Occasionally, Daniel glanced around, perhaps reliving his childhood memories. "The house looks nicer now," he commented. "I finally have the time and money to fix it," I replied honestly, without sarcasm. Daniel lowered his head slightly. After eating, he took out the photos, old pictures of our family, ones he had kept secretly all this time. Photos of Daniel as a newborn, his 5th birthday, elementary school graduation, so many happy moments. "Dad," he said softly, "I've always kept these, even when Isabella told me to throw them away." So behind his changed behavior, Daniel had still held on to us. He handed me one special photo, a picture of Margaret, taken a few months before her cancer diagnosis. She looked beautiful, smiling gently, with our backyard garden behind her. "Dad, I kept this hidden," Daniel said, wiping his tears. "Isabella didn't like it when I displayed Mom's photo." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked gently. "I was too afraid of losing Isabella, too afraid I couldn't give her the luxurious life she wanted. I forgot who I really was." I nodded, beginning to understand his inner struggle. "And now," Daniel said firmly, "I want to remember Mom without shame. I realize now she wouldn't have been proud of who I became." We sat in silence, letting those words sink in. Outside, the sun began to set, filling the room with warm golden light. "Dad," Daniel said, finally, breaking the silence, "I didn't come to ask for help tonight. Let the house go. It was never really a home. There was no warmth in it, no real love." "So what's your plan?"
I asked. "I've rented a small room near my new job. The salary isn't big, but it's enough to live." "And Isabella? The kids?" He smiled bitterly. "She said she needs time to think, but we both know she won't return to a man who can't give her luxury." "Aren't you sad?" "Of course I am, Dad, but I also feel relieved, like a heavy burden has been lifted." I understood that feeling well. "If you want to start over," I said, "start by respecting yourself. Don't repeat the same mistakes with your children." Daniel nodded. "I'll try, Dad. It won't be easy, but I want to be better, not for Isabella, but for myself and for you." We sat quietly, a peaceful silence, one that allowed healing. "Dad," Daniel asked before leaving, "may I come again next week?" "Of course," I replied. "This house is always open to you." Coming home. After Daniel left, I sat on the porch, watching stars appear in the night sky. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not because all problems were solved, but because I knew we were on the path towards healing. A few days later, Rose called. "Uncle Edward, the kids are performing at church this Sunday. We're cooking stew. Don't forget to come." "Of course, Rose, I'll be there," I replied, smiling. That Sunday, I sat in the back row of the church, listening to children sing joyfully. Among them was Adam, Rose's 7-year-old grandson, who reminded me so much of Daniel as a child. Afterwards, we gathered at Rose's house for lunch. The stew reminded me of Margaret's cooking, warm, rich, and made with love. "Grandpa Ed, will you teach me how to make kites again?" Adam asked excitedly. "Of course," I said, patting his head. Looking around the table, Rose, her husband, their children and grandchildren, I realized something. They weren't my blood relatives, but they made me feel like family. Not because of what I could give, but because of who I was. "How's Daniel doing?" Rose's husband asked. "He's learning to start again," I replied. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters." A new season. On my way home, I received a message from Daniel. "Dad, next week I start a new project. The pay is decent. May I take you out to lunch to celebrate?" I smiled. Not because of the money, but because he wanted to celebrate with me, not ask from me. "Of course, son. Let me know when." That night, I sat under the guava tree Margaret had planted years ago. The tree was old, but still strong, still bearing fruit every season. "Margaret," I whispered, "our son is growing again, like a new shoot on an old tree." On my table now stood 2 photos, one of Margaret in the kitchen, smiling warmly as she cooked, and one of me sitting with Rose's family that Sunday. 2 photos, 2 phases of my life. As I lay down to sleep, I whispered to myself, family isn't about blood, it's about who still sets a chair for you, even when you bring nothing but sincerity. The next morning, I woke up feeling light. A new season had begun, not one born from anger or revenge, but from peace and acceptance. While watering the plants in the front yard, a small car stopped in front of the house. Daniel stepped out, smiling brightly, looking fresher than I had seen him in a long time. "Dad, I got a big project," he exclaimed, like the little boy who once ran home to show his report card. "Thank God," I replied, smiling. We sat on the porch, drinking warm tea and eating fried bananas. Daniel spoke enthusiastically about his new project, about using his civil engineering skills again, and about coworkers who supported him. "They don't care about my past," Daniel said. "They judge me by what I can do now." "That's real life, son," I replied. "Not about who owns the biggest house or fanciest car, but who has the most sincere heart." Daniel nodded. "I was living in the wrong world, Dad, choosing appearances over essence. Now I want a simple, meaningful life, just like you and Mom taught me." I smiled. Warmth filled my chest. "Oh, Dad," Daniel added suddenly, "I'm thinking of renting a room nearby so I can visit more often."